Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
And so to the chair of the BBC Trust, Rona Fairhead. 2016 is a big year for the BBC as negotiations get underway for the renewal of its charter. The government has made it clear it expects the BBC to be managed more efficiently and to focus on its core role as a public service broadcaster, and we will talk about that. Plus, the damage to the BBC caused by the revelations about one of its former stars, Jimmy Savile. So a lot to cover, Rona. Good morning. Thanks for coming in.
Good morning.
You heard Nicola Sturgeon there. Something big is going to have to change in Scotland, is it not, in terms of the BBC's offer to the Scottish people?
I think it's very clear, and the public have been very clear, the licence fee payers, that they want more portrayal, more representation, not just in Scotland, across the nations and across the regions. And if you look at the...
So does that mean more investment in Scotland in specific terms?
It means two things. It means that more work has been pushed out. BBC was very London-centric. Now more than 50% is outside London. That's a good direction of travel. Yeah. More is produced in Scotland and Wales and in Salford and around the country. That's a good direction. What we need now is to make sure that's sustainable, that people can look at their screens, see themselves, whether they're Scottish, whether they
Sure.
are of a particular age group or from a particular ethnic group.
What about a Scottish channel?
Look, I think we are looking at all options
So that's
right now.
possible.
All options are being looked at. The important thing is that the people of Scotland feel they're portrayed, they're represented,
Which they
and
clearly
that the
don't
news...
enough at the moment.
No. I think that the statistics say that something has to be done to improve that. What I would say, though, is yes, we have to improve that. However, one of the glories of the BBC is that it does reach all across the UK. It allows the UK to come together. The Scots watch Sherlock, enjoy Sherlock, even though it's made in Wales. Similarly, the Welsh love Shetland, even though it's made in Scotland. People benefit from the BBC,
Right.
the international news. They benefit so many things
so
right across, and almost 90% of the Scottish people watch channels that are made right across the country.
So we're now on to what the BBC is and what it should be through the charter
Absolutely.
renewal process. Do you think the BBC is going to emerge from this process as a radically different organisation?
I believe it will be an improved organisation. Radically changed, no. We have done a huge amount of work with the public. They are very clear. Extraordinary support for the BBC. They want the BBC to be broadly as it is. In fact, 60% would want it to do more versus less than 10% to do less. The important thing is that it is not perfect, but the public are very clear. They like the BBC they have.
Sure,
they want it to have to inform, educate, entertain, but they also want to have some things changed, and they're very clear about what those are. They want it to be more ambitious. They want it to be more independent.
These are very, if I may say so, quite vague sounding things. I'm quite interested in the actual specific changes we might see. For instance, is the news channel safe?
We have now got a financial framework that was agreed with the Chancellor. Absent any change, radical change in the BBC, that the people who watch the programmes don't want.
Is that a yes or a no?
I said everything is being looked at. Nothing is off the table. It's a tough settlement, but the executive will work out what it is that they need to cut. The efficiencies will be that the priority will be on making sure the programmes, the stations that people listen to, will be protected as much as possible. And I can't say that anything is off the table. It's not.
So
but
there will be further cuts, you said.
We have been very clear from the start that everything will be done to improve efficiency, but that it is likely that some programmes and potentially some services will be affected. That is the nature of what has to be done, but the priority will be making sure that the programmes that the public love, the Wolf Halls, the sports, the news, will remain strong because the BBC is paid for by the public. That is what they want.
Now, the Savile report leaked, the Dame Janet Smith report, there's been a leak of it. More than 60 attacks by Savile, including more than 4 rapes, you know, snufflings, grovellings, horrible things going on behind the scenes. An appalling story which shows the BBC, I know it was in the past, in a very, very bad light indeed.
I agree. I mean, I'm absolutely horrified. It's an absolutely appalling behaviours that were allowed to pass unchecked. You have to think about the victims here. They have suffered so much, incredibly traumatic. And I think we have to.
We failed as an institution, did we not?
We failed. The BBC needed to do better. I think that you have to admire their courage to come forward. Only if people have the courage to come forward can we understand what happened and learn the lessons. The BBC has made a huge amount of changes, changed its culture, changed its processes, and this is one thing I can say to you, Andrew, and this is really important. If Dame Janet Smith comes with any further changes that are needed, they will be done. And I stand in front of you to say the Trust will ensure that the management feet is held to the fire to make sure that those changes are implemented and as quickly as possible.
Well, that's interesting because Dame Janet Smith says that she thinks it's possible there is there is a specific Savile, but there could be somebody in the BBC now abusing and bullying people.
I would hang on there, Andrew. This, what you're talking about is a leak of an early release of the report. I think out of respect to the victims, we have to wait until the formal report is published. Dame Janet Smith, very senior judge. Yes. We have asked her to work. She has worked for several years. She has to make sure that this is right, that the evidence is right, and we'll make her assessment. I am very happy, once the report is published, to come back and talk about it. But let me stand back and talk about...
Let me talk
about the principle.
Let's put the report to one side.
Let me talk... I agree.
Let me just ask you again, is it possible that even now there is a very, very high-profile, much-regarded BBC quotes, talent quotes person behaving badly, and still that culture of deference and hostility to whistleblowers and a feeling that you look upwards and you're very worried about what your bosses are saying, stops that being public?
We have to create an environment where people feel confident to raise their hands and to say, this is not acceptable. I think we need that in society, but particularly in the BBC. The BBC has put in all sorts of measures to protect children. Children are now have chaperones. There are screenings done of people who are involved with children. They've put in a very comprehensive whistleblowing line. Everything that we can think of that has been done, that can be done, is being done. And that's my assurance to you. Any further changes to make it even safer will be done.
Some people say that you, Rona Fairhead, shouldn't be in charge of the BBC Trust because of your involvement in HSBC in the past, which was in turn involved in helping British citizens, well-off people, avoid their tax in Switzerland. What do you say to them?
Well, let me say, what happened in HSBC, behaviour that was criminal, behaviour that was against the practices of the bank. We have said as a bank that we accept responsibility, and we've said that we are deeply sorry for any reputational damage and what happened. What we chose to do was to stay and fight. There has been enormous change.
And you knew nothing about this at all at the time, even though you were in charge of the committee?
No, we actually had independents coming with information. This was not disclosed. Improvements have to be made, and the reason I stayed was because the board asked me to stay, but more importantly, the regulators with whom I worked did. But I have to say, my focus is now on the BBC. We need a BBC that the public want. They want it independent. They want it to be broad.
And they don't want this programme to go over either, so we have to finish. Rona Fairhead, thank you very much indeed.